this fall, I taught a perimenopause intensive. So that was 8 hours of content all about perimenopause, the research on perimenopause, what's working in practice, what's not, etc. And so I probably read 1,500 research articles in the process of creating this. And I understand I have the luxury of time. I am able to read those articles. I know how to read articles. I was trained on reading research. Like all of these things are things that I have that other people don't have. And I get it. But the only, not like criticism, but critique I have of the Menopause Show.
Welcome to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast, where we empower women with the latest insights and advice on holistic health. From cutting-edge medical research to practical wellness tips, our mission is to help you thrive at every stage of life. Join us as we explore topics ranging from hormonal balance and reproductive health to nutrition and mental well-being. Whether you're seeking solutions for a specific health concern or simply want to enhance your overall wellness, you're in the right place. Let's embark on this journey to better health together. This is the Advanced Women's Health Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast. I am host Menopause Show, and so I wanted to pop on today and just talk about some of the big takeaways from that and what the Menopause Show was, all that kind of stuff. For those of you who are watching the video, you can see I'm still in my hotel room. I am in a crazy period of travel, as I always am in the fall. I end up speaking a couple times a week on honestly a huge range of topics. So my world, in the world of advanced women's health, I think what we're known for is where hormones and inflammation interact. And that has to do with metabolism, that has to do with menopause, that has to do with liver health. And so I've been teaching on all of those things. I have been educating companies on burnout. I have been really just supporting women. And now with the launch of Advanced Men's Health, which some of those announcements have come out, and we will come on and talk about Advanced Men's Health very soon. But with that, we are really helping to just break the mold of research. And I think this was one of the big things that I wanted to dive into today and take away. But first, so the National Menopause Show is a show that is put on in Toronto. 2024 was their first year, 2025 was their second year, and the organizers do a phenomenal job. I actually had the pleasure of talking to the organizer last year, and she is their company is in the business of events for medical practitioners. And so she wanted to create a consumer show, so meaning a show that patients can go to get amazing education and interact with sponsors and get the same experience that medical doctors get. And I think it's just such an admirable goal to have. And I really do think she was quite successful in that. So how the show is structured, some of the shows we do is a free-for-all. So you come in, there's like just a ton of vendors, tons of people. There's no vetting process. You just go and it's like anyone and their mother who's willing to pay shows up, which is great. Like I love a democratic system. And then there are little talks that happen, but the focus is really on the consumer products. The focus is really on the vendors and the trade show part. So what I mean by that, for anyone who's like, I don't know, there's booths. And so you walk around to the different booths and talk to people. That's what we talk about when we say trade show. And so this is very different. The focus of this is education. So there is a conference hall that is as big as where the different companies are standing. And the goal is for women to go in and listen to talks and get education. And I think it's phenomenal. So with that, and with having an education focus, there was a lot of really educated women wanting to come and get their questions answered. And I think it is such a powerful thing. And I was honestly so grateful to be one of the big integrative clinics that was featured there to be able to answer some of those questions. So before we get into what some of the questions were and how I answered them, because that's really what I want to do here for you guys today, is give you the opportunity, if you weren't there, to still get some of that education, is I want to comment on a couple things. So what a lot of patients don't know is that In addition to my role in advanced women's health, running the business, training our providers, running our clinical rounds, I also train other doctors. So I train doctors, nurse practitioners on essentially where research meets clinical practice. And so this fall, I taught a perimenopause intensive. So that was 8 hours of content all about perimenopause, the research on perimenopause, what's working in practice, what's not, etc. And so I probably read 1,500 research articles in the process of creating this. And I understand I have the luxury of time. I am able to read those articles. I know how to read articles. I was trained on reading research. Like all of these things are things that I have that other people don't have. And I get it. But the only, not like criticism, but critique I have of the menopause show is that there was still this conversation around us not having evidence. Women are not researched. And as much as women are not researched as much as men, and I get that, and that menopause is an area of life that is particularly underfunded, I think that conversation leads to people not actually going forward and looking for the research that's there because there is a ton of research available. But we aren't using it because we say there's not a lot of research, or we aren't looking for it because we say there's not a lot of research. But there is enough research that you can come to conclusions, that you can help women, that you can support them. There are thousands of research studies that are done. And so, from my perspective, as much as there's not always a huge, what we call sample size, meaning they studied 1,000 women, not 20,000 women, there is still something we can learn from that 1,000 women that we need to take into practice and try. And if it works, then that's clinical evidence. That's evidence we have in practice. But there was still a lot of conversations about we don't know, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know. And some of the things we were saying we don't know to on stage are things we actually like absolutely know. And so I've never really thought about it this way before this show, but I really do think the fact that we are still talking about how new this area of research is preventing some people from actually taking action and doing the work to do the research, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to put that out there. This is not, again, a criticism to any individual person. It's just if we keep saying there's no research when there is, we're just perpetuating an issue that doesn't need to be perpetuated. So that was something that was coming up a lot that I was just like, that's not completely true. I think the other piece that came up is there was definitely like one perspective offered on stage. And a lot of people came up to me, nurses, doctors, naturopathic doctors who were there, et cetera. And they were like, what are your thoughts on that? And I said, I think any education is valuable education. And I think it is dangerous, like an organizer, to confuse people on stage. And because there's still so many people who are confused about the research, I think this is naturally going to happen. But the thing that I loved as a caveat is that even though there was only one perspective offered on stage, and some of the definitions that were provided, I was worried were going to confuse consumers, they came and asked questions. So, for example, one of the statements that was made was that bioidentical hormones are not any safer than any other hormone. What does that even mean? Like, and it was repeated a couple of times. And I'm like, okay, well, let's break this down. And this is what I was doing at the booth. So I'm going to take you guys through this because we have patients coming up saying, we've heard that bioidentical hormones aren't safer than any other hormones. First and foremost, you need to define a couple things as part of that. So when we're looking, bioidentical is a word that is attached to a category of hormones. And what that means is that they look similar to our hormones. Okay, so that's all that word means. So then we have this category that they define as other hormones. What does that mean? So let's break it down. And this is where, again, like I talk a lot with my hands. So for anyone who's not watching, I'm like emphatically waving around. So when we look at hormones, there's hormones like the birth control pill. Okay. So this is an oral birth control pill. It has a, a compound. So it has a variety of different ethinyl estradiols. Okay. So this is not estradiol. It is a key that can wiggle a door open, but not fully unlock it. So when we're talking about hormones and receptors, hormones are the key, receptor is the law. And so just like, you can put, well, I don't know. I'm not. I'm not a thief. But this is like for anyone wondering, this is exactly how our calls go in Advanced Women's Health. But you can put like a bobby pin into a lock, depending on like the old school locks, and jiggle it around and get the door to open. Or you can put the right key in. And so a lot of these would, like, if you want to put them in the category of synthetic hormones, which I don't love, but if you put them in that category, it is easy to understand, which I do love, easy to understand. Synthetic hormones, quote unquote, if you are wiggling that bobby pin around, eventually you'll get an outcome. So that's things like the birth control pill. That's things like the hormonal IUD, medications for like Visan, etc. So these are called progestins or progestogens, depending on who you're talking to. So these are different medications that you can take that are like wiggling it around. They will open the door. What does that mean? That means that if you take your birth control pill consistently, your body thinks it has enough hormones, you're not going to ovulate. That means the lining of your uterus becomes really thin if you have a hormonal IUD, and in some situations, it suppresses ovulation at the level of your brain. If you're taking is hormonally suppressive medications for conditions like fibroids or endometriosis, etc., then in theory, you're getting suppression of the what we call HPO axis, the way your brain communicates with your ovaries. And so you're not ovulating, you don't make a large amount of hormones. So that is a category of medications when it comes to cycling women. When it comes to perimenopausal or menopausal women, there are also a category of synthetic estrogens. So the most common one we use is called CEE, conjugated equine estrogen. So this is where you get into the debate, because if you wanted something in theory that was like natural, you would probably be fine with horse urine, which is equine estrogen. But that's not what many people want. And there is a risk profile associated with those CEE and ethinyl estradiol and some of these other medications that we do not see associated with what we call quote unquote bioidentical. So let's then talk about that. Okay. So now we have the category of menopause hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, hormone replacement therapy, that sits in what they'll call it bioidentical. So this is estradiol and oral micronized progesterone or topical progesterone. And so when we look at estradiol, it is one of three forms of estrogen, and it is the key that puts the lock in to get it an outcome. And so we're using these to add back hormones after someone has taken them away. So if you think about, and this is a gross oversimplification, and I want to acknowledge this, but again, I like mental constructs. I find they're very helpful. So if you think about what's happening with the different forms of ethinyl estradiol, the different synthetics, oftentimes the goal is to actually lower whole body hormones. Whereas when we are adding back the estradiol or progesterone, these add back, you're trying to bring the body up to a level of hormones that supports their brain, their tissues, their body, their bones, et cetera, et cetera. And so on stage, this is all to say that on stage, they were saying there's no safety profile difference between those two types of hormones. That is categorically untrue. We have hundreds of research studies at this point that separates those hormones into different categories and helps to understand the risk and benefit of those things. So, for example, we know if you take a progesterone or progestogen, progestin or progestogen, see, even I do. But when we do that, there are different risks and higher risks of certain things than when we look. And again, if I have videos on this on the back end, I'm just not going to publicly display it because I'll get my head bitten. But we see that in that situation, progesterone oral can reduce those risks. When we look at estradiol topically, which is how most people are doing it, the add back estradiol that's helping bone health, that's helping cardiovascular health, that's helping brain health, it's helping all of these different types of things. If you take oral version of that, over 65 already have cardiovascular disease, there is some research to suggest that one or two extra people, upwards, the worst study shows an extra eight people out of 10,000 people, which is still upsetting. But that's how many people experience a cardiovascular outcome, stroke, etc., clot, etc. Okay. So when we look at it, there are very different risk profiles. And so to simplify on stage and say there's no difference between these two things, I have a huge issue with because it perpetuates the confusion. So one of the things we do for patients at Advanced Women's Health is we have an intake form that or like a consent form that educates the patient. It says, okay, 9 out of 10,000 people experience this if they are on no hormone replacement therapy. 10 out of 10,000 people experience this if they are on hormone replacement therapy. 25 people experience this if they have obesity. This many people experience this if they have alcohol, because I think sometimes these risks seem so scary when we use them in what we call relative terms versus absolute terms. Meaning, if someone says there's a 30% increase in you having cancer, and you're like, I don't want that. But you realize that your risk went from 3 people, right, upwards to 4 people, 5 people, etc. It helps you to quantify what the actual risks are compared to the risks you're taking on a day-to-day basis. Getting in a car, drinking alcohol, not taking care of your body are risks. They're often bigger risks than actually taking a hormone. So I won't harp on because I don't want this to be boring, but this is something that I think we really do need better education around. And I do think is something that I would like to see more of, is like breaking down the actual research for people. So that was one big thing. But again, people were asking questions, which I think is really, really critical.
Today's episode is brought to you by none other than Advanced Women's Health. If you are interested in diving in deeper to your health, if you are finally ready to feel like yourself, and you are finally over hearing everything's normal, everything's fine, and you want a deeper dive into your healthcare, then we are here to help you. We are currently helping patients in British Columbia and Ontario, Canada. But don't worry, if you're in another province, still reach out, get added to the wait list as we expand coast to coast. We cannot wait to work with you. Check out the show notes for more information on how to get started.
So then, what were some of the other things? So one of the things that I was shocked about the most is that we have this matrix. So it's essentially, my belief structure is that there's only 5 to 7 causes of disease. That's it. That's all. And so when we look at that, the 5 to 7 causes of disease are insulin and blood sugar signaling. It is looking at liver health and gut health, the immune system and inflammation. We're looking at nutrient deficiencies, we look at the nervous system, and then we look at what we call cellular resting, oxidative stress. They're the same thing, or mitochondrial issues. So those are like the categories. And what we know to be true is that those things have a bigger impact on the menopausal transition than hormones. Now, hormones impact a lot of those things, so it is an intertwined loop. But one of the things that we found is that people absolutely loved the idea that hormones weren't the only fix to their problems, and that hormones weren't, like, if they did not want to or were not in a category where they could take hormones, then there was nothing they could do for themselves. Because as much as HRT and hormone replacement therapy can do so much good for people, a lot of people are not interested, which is totally fine. There's extremely few people who would not qualify, but there are people that don't want to. And you can still work on your insulin. You can still work on your gut. You can still support inflammatory cycles. You can still live. And I think the feeling right now was that a lot of people wanted good education about hormones. They were also in a situation where they felt like if they didn't take hormones, they would die an awful death. And we also know that's not true for a lot of people. So that matrix and people just again deeply understanding that they could action two areas of their life and significantly improve their health was something I was surprised that people were so interested in. So it's definitely something that you'll hear about more on here for sure. So then the next piece, and these were really phenomenal questions that came up, was about lots of questions about visceral fat, lots of questions about hysterectomy. And so it was funny because going into the show, I've done a bunch of menopause events over the last year. Thousands of women have listened to them. I'm so grateful for that. And within that, you get a lot of similar questions. So I actually recorded these 10-minute master classes and I can make them available to you guys as well so that you can find the link in the show notes on that. But one of the things that I did in these 10-minute master classes is broke down what happens when you get your tubes tied or removed, what happens when you get a hysterectomy, like what do you need to know. I talked about weight gain and visceral fat, and I talked about HRT. So these were the questions. So I was like, oh, whew, at least my sample size is still accurate. But when we were breaking these things down, there was a lot of people coming being told that they had to get a hysterectomy. They had fibroids, adenomyosis, severe endometriosis. They had done everything they could, and they had a hysterectomy coming up. And so in that situation, they were coming to figure out what they needed to know. And I thought it was such a powerful thing to do. And I talked to a number of people in that boat. And so when we break that down, the important things to know when someone has a hysterectomy is you kind of break it down into different categories. So, one, there's obviously the hormonal component, and two, there is the structural component. And then three, I guess, is the immunological component. So, or the insulin component. See, I always say three and then I do four. But the thing that caused endo to grow is immune system dysfunction. The things that causing fibroids to grow is genetics, insulin, immune dysfunction. So removing them is not removing the systemic risk you have because of them. And I think it's really important people understand that. It's not solving your problem. It will solve your bleeding, which can be wildly valuable to people that are bleeding so heavily. So it can be the right solution for some people. It is overprescribed as a solution, but it's an option. There was also a couple of people there that were told they had very early stages of cell changes that could indicate cancer and offered a hysterectomy. So there's that situation as well where you're going to get a hysterectomy in that situation most often. And you don't necessarily, we don't know that you have inflammatory insulin, growth factor issues, etc. But when someone's uterus is removed, you can remove the uterus, you can remove the uterus and the cervix, you can remove the uterus, the cervix, and the ovaries. So if you remove the uterus, then, and most often they do the cervix too, because cervical cancer is a thing, then you will be in a situation where you still have your ovaries, you still have hormones, but there is a significant decline in hormones that are produced. And so we need to be mindful of that. If you're in a situation where they remove your ovaries too, you immediately go into menopause, and it's a huge shock to the system. We see a lot of immune system disruption happen. We see a lot of mood symptoms, hot flashes, like it gets bad quickly. And so, in that situation, depending on someone's age, but almost in any situation, I'm recommending hormone replacement therapy as an additional support because it will help to ease that transition from very high levels of hormones to low levels of hormones. I think sometimes there's this misconception that when someone's on hormone replacement therapy, we're trying to rebuild peak hormones. And so for women in Canada, peak levels of your progesterone are like 50, and peak levels of estradiol, depending on where you're looking throughout the cycle, are anywhere between like 500 and 1,000, sometimes higher. When we're trying to replace hormones, we are trying to get estradiol to be generally in the range of like 150, 250 if you're young, so not 1,000. We're trying to get progesterone in the range of like 15, max 30, not 50. And so we're looking at replacing low levels of hormones. This is not massive dosing of hormones and is a drop in the bucket compared to perimenopausal women whose estradiol is sometimes like 3,000, right? So when we're looking at that, we're replacing these hormones to support that transition and support their immune system, their mind, their mitochondria, their hormones, their energy, etc. So you do want to have a provider that's supporting you on that journey. The other thing that's important is that structurally you now don't have a uterus. So your bladder will fall, you can get bowel changes, pelvic floor changes. So it's very important that you have a pelvic physio that is supporting you through that journey as well and can help with that transition. So that was questions that came up there. Then there were all the questions about visceral fat. So I think, again, this goes back to my first point. So it's probably good that we round out on this. We have research that tells us how to customize someone's diet to their blood work, what blood tests to run to tell someone how many grams of carbohydrates they should eat, if they should fast or not fast, etc. We have research that tells us how many grams of protein a woman should be eating in the perimenopausal transition. We have research that tells us how much fiber someone should be eating, when someone should eat compared to exercise or not. Like, this is not a mystery to everyone. And I think because there's billions of dollars at play to get people to try yet another diet, yet another very specific, precise supplement for their weight, et cetera, et cetera. And because what the research tells us isn't always easy or a quick pill, there's so much money to be made in this area. But that doesn't mean there's no research. And I want to be very clear on that. We know how many minutes of exercise for different types and different types of exercise for subcutaneous versus fat versus losing muscle versus gaining muscle. And again, I have all of that in the link in the show notes. But we don't have a doctor-patient relationship. And so technically I shouldn't be telling you these things on here, right? The research shows us very specifically what needs to happen. And so we know that it's anywhere between 1.2, some studies are now saying 1.6 grams per kilogram and 1 gram per pound of body mass. That is a lot of protein. The research shows that 200 minutes-ish of zone 2 cardio may be really important for visceral fat loss, but that progressive loading is very important for maintaining muscle. And so oftentimes I always say to our team, our job is to make this as easy as possible. Our job is to use blood work to give us an indication of what's going on with muscle and bone, what's going on with insulin and how you store fat, and be able to personalize and customize precisely to the patient. That's our job. And our job is to help you get through that process. Because the first couple of weeks, when you're trying to add color, reduce carbohydrates, if that's what you need to do, add protein, which is not easy, move your body in different ways. Like, if you try to do that all in the same week, you're screwed. So you need support. You need someone to hold your hand through what's most important for you in what order. And talking to women about that and saying, oh yeah, it's like, I don't know, $150 in labs can give you that answer. Depending on where you are in BC, labs are a lot more expensive. But these can be very expensive tests in some places. They don't have to be very expensive tests to get answers to some of these questions. And so I really want to empower women that if you're sitting in this situation, you're not sure if you're in perimenopause or not, you are just feeling like there's so much confusion out there. You're feeling like you're not getting clear answers. I would argue to say that you're not, and this is going to rub some people the wrong way. And honestly, I'm kind of over apologizing for it, but you're just not working with a practitioner who knows enough. Because if I am absolutely taking a wild guess with a patient, I'm always telling them, you don't fit into this category of research. You don't fit into this category of research. You're kind of in no man's land. So I'm going to take the research from here and here and here and here and apply it to your situation. I don't necessarily know if this is going to be a reproducible outcome, but I'm pretty confident. Here's why. Are you good to go? They're like, yes. Outside of that, we have a ton of research. And as much as like the dose you need of hormones and the types of protein you're going to eat, these are all an art. A science is looking at conjugated equine estrogen versus estradiol. It's looking at progestins versus oral micronized progesterone. That is a science. That is not an art. That is not a guess, right? How much you need, is an art. That's why it can take upwards of 6 months to find the right dosage for you, because you're a unique individual. Understanding how many grams of carbohydrates you should eat at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because they're all going to be different. That's the science, right? You not liking berries and wanting to eat bananas and us fighting you on that, that's an art, right? The type of exercise you need to do to build muscle, support your bone, and lose fat is a science. The fact that you have an injury that prevents you from doing some of those exercises, the fact that I have endometriosis, so I have to be careful how much I load my sacroiliac joint, that's an art. And so one of the things I really encourage you to do, if you're talking to providers and they are talking about the fact that there's no science, is I would just say, is there no science at all, or is there no science that you're aware of? Now, don't say this to a doctor in a doctor's visit when you're trying to get hormones, to be clear, right? We need to, there's certain situations, but when you're in these types of environments and something doesn't make sense, you can just say, like, are you at a limit of your knowledge? And that's something you can say to your family doctor if you're talking to them. Be like, kind of, where are you in terms of your education and like passion for prescribing hormones? Because if they say, oh, I don't know anything, that's a huge ego hit. Honestly, even to this day, people will come into me and they're like, I want you to help me with XYZ. And as much as I don't take new patients very often, when I have to say to them, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, I truly don't know. It's not the most fun. I do it because you guys matter to me more than my ego, but not everyone is like that. And so not everyone will say, I don't know, I don't have the education. But if you ask them, like, is this your area of passion? And they say, no. Okay, fair enough. I'll go find someone who it is. I'll go find someone to help me get answers to these questions, who is so in love with the area of medicine that I need support with, that they spend their spare time looking things up, taking research, taking courses, etc. But you can find those doctors. And I think it is really important as medical providers that we are looking at the limits to our knowledge, but also that we are doing our due diligence in terms of telling a patient, this is a limit of research, this is a limit of the research I know, versus this is just an art, right? And the research says this, you're not a research study. And so here's where I'm customizing it, and we're going to have to troubleshoot and try together. And I think all of those things are incredibly valuable conversations to have. And they're conversations that we need to have again. So that was moral of the story. The National Menopause Show was phenomenal. It was so great. Honestly, it was just like so much fun to like get to see people that I only talk to once a year, to get to hang out with some of my like friends in the industry, to just get to talk shop with some medical doctors that I know and love, some nurses that I know and love, some researchers that I know and love, companies that I know and love. It was just great on all fronts. I think it was incredibly valuable. And just like anything, when you come to those educational events, you need to understand that if something doesn't make sense to you, you can ask more questions and you can get answers that feel aligned to you, and that very few people have time to stay up to date on all of the research. That is why I focus so hard on where hormones and inflammation interact, because I don't have time to research anything else, right? And as much as that's a big topic, I've been at this for 16 years now. More than that? That's crazy. That is crazy. More than that. I've been doing research in this world for an extremely long time. And so that lens of understanding and that foundation I've built allows me to have conversations like this with all of you. So I hope it was valuable. Honestly, if you like these types of episodes and you want to hear more about them, just screenshot this, share it, tag me, and say, we want more of these types of episodes, because I'm just sitting here in my hotel room. And so I thought I would pop on and say, hey, and give you guys a rundown. But this is something that I am really passionate about, is getting you education and entertainment, but also sometimes really hardcore education. So let me know if this is something you've loved. Comment, share, like, rate the show. It all means so much to us, because like, we don't have sponsors on here. This is not something I get paid to do. This is something I do because I want you guys to have the best information and to be able to educate yourself. So have a beautiful day, everyone, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you had as much fun as we did. And if you loved today's episode, share it with a friend and leave us a review. That is how we spread this message, and that is how we are going to revolutionize healthcare in Canada for women. Have a beautiful day and be well.